أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this blessed month of Sha'ban, and we pray that Allah bless any our lesson and make it a reason where our sins are forgiven, our prayers are answered inshaAllah ta'ala. And we pray that Allah bless us any goodness in dunya, goodness in akhirah, and open for us doors of understanding and tawfiq and hidayah, doors any of guidance, and that we are able to obey Allah inwardly and outwardly. Ameen Ya Rabbal Alameen. So we have entered into the chapter of fasting. So without wasting any time, and we will continue from where we stop, and I hope that we can finish this chapter before the coming of Ramadan inshaAllah ta'ala. So in our last lesson, we were speaking about swallowing saliva. This is where we stopped in our last lesson, where the author mentioned وَلَا بِبَلْعِ رِيقِ الطَّاهِرِ الْخَالِصِ مِنْ مَعْدِنِهِ إِنْ أَخْرَجَ عَلَى لِسَانِهِ. He mentioned that fasting is not invalidated by swallowing the clean pure saliva. Meaning, if a person swallows any saliva, it does not invalidate any the fast. But the condition is that it must be khalis. Khalis here meaning it must be pure saliva. So the opposite of khalis, if it is mixed with something else. And if, for example, if a person has eaten the sahur, for example, and then there are traces of food in the mouth, it is not permissible for him to swallow the traces of food that is mixed with the saliva. So it is compulsory upon him to remove the saliva that is mixed with other substances. So that is why here he mentioned at-riq at-tahir al-khalis. The opposite of tahir is mutanajjis. If the saliva is mixed with blood, for example, if a person has blood in his mouth, if he swallow the saliva that is mixed with blood, it invalidates the fast, unless if there is too much blood to such an extent that it is difficult for him to control, then it is forgiven. But if he has the capacity to wash his mouth and to remove the saliva that is mixed with the blood, then it is compulsory upon him to do so. If he swallows the saliva that is mixed with blood, the fasting becomes invalidated. And then the author mentioned وَإِنْ أَخْرَجَهُ عَلَى لِسَانِهِ. In here is lil-ghaya, meaning even if he remove the saliva outside the boundary of his mouth by sticking out the tongue. So if a person sticks out the tongue away from out of the mouth, there are saliva that is present on the tongue. Now this is does not invalidate the fasting, unless if a person spit the saliva and swallow it back, then it invalidates the fasting, because now it becomes a secondary object. So now inshallah we will continue from here. The author mentioned وَيُفْتِرُ بِجَارِ رِيقِ بِمَا بَيْنَ الْأَسْنَانِ لِقُدْرَتِهِ عَلَى مَجِّهِ وَبِالنُّخَامَةِ كَذَلِكَ. One of the things that invalidate any fasting, if a person for example he moves his saliva in between the teeth, and he swallow the traces of what is between the teeth, when he has the ability to remove it from his mouth. What does it mean? For example, when a person consume food, there are traces of food in between the teeth, and if a person, for example, he gargle his mouth with saliva, he gargle in his mouth, and he uses the tongue to remove what is in between the teeth. So now there are traces of food or traces of other substances that are present in between the teeth. Now it invalidates the fasting. Why? Because this is a secondary substance. This is not riq al-khalis. This is not saliva that is pure, but it is saliva that is mixed with the traces of what is in between the teeth. So this is basically what the author is saying. But of course the condition is liqudratihi, if he has the ability to remove it. But if he does not have the ability, meaning if the traces of food now mixes with the saliva and he cannot differentiate where is the saliva and where is the traces of food, and he unintentionally swallow it, then it is forgiven. Then it is forgiven. And this is the same case. And if a person has traces of food, and for example, and he tries his best to remove it, but there are still some traces that he does not have the ability to remove it, it is forgiven. And the author mentioned وَبِالنُّخَامَةِ كَذَلِكَ, pertaining to phlegm, it carries the same ruling. It carries the same ruling. And if he has the ability to remove the phlegm, it is compulsory upon him to remove the phlegm. But he does not have the capacity to do so, then it is forgiven if it is swallowed. And then he mentioned وَبِوُصُولِ مَاءِ الْمَضْمَضَةِ الْجَوْفَ إِنْ بَالَغَ فِي غَيْرِ نَجَاسَةٍ. One of the things that will make fasting invalid if a person does mubalarah in gargling. What is mubalarah? Mubalarah meaning you overdo something. Mubalarah. If a person, for example, while he is fasting and he takes water when he wants to gargle in wudu, the madmada, and he gargle extensively, excessively, strongly, to such an extent some of the water enters into the body's cavity, now the fasting becomes invalidated. Why? Because we said he is at fault. Why must you do mubalarah in gargling? In fasting it is makruh to do mubalarah in gargling. We should not do it excessively, especially when we are fasting. If any water enters, it is your fault. But if you do not do mubalarah and some of the water enters in your body cavity, that is forgiven. So this is a difference between what is forgiven and what is not forgiven. What is not forgiven if you intentionally does mubalarah. If you intentionally does the excessive gargling. If you do not do excessive gargling, it is forgiven. The fasting is still valid. So here he mentioned that if the water enters the jawf here, there are two types. One is stomach, the other one is the brain. This is considered to be al-jawf, and the meaning of al-jawf, these are body parts that digest the food and nutrients of the body. So it goes back into the stomach, or it goes into the brains. So here water can enter the stomach through the mouth, likewise through the nose through istinshaq. And if a person does mubalarah is istinshaq, and he carries the same ruling as doing mubalarah in madmada. He said in balagha fi ghayri najasatin, but ghayri najasa meaning if the mouth has najasa, then if he does mubalarah and some of the water enters the body's cavity, it does not invalidate the fasting. Why? Now again, this is forgiven. Why is forgiven? Because there is najasa. If a person imagine if there is a filth in the mouth, surely you are in need to use a lot of water to remove filth. Now if the water if the gargling is done excessively because of a reason, what is the reason? The reason is to remove filth. Now this is forgiven if some of the water enters into the body's cavity. وبغير مبالغة من مضمضة لتبرد أو رابعة أو عبث. If a person does place water inside his mouth without any valid reason, if a person does it does madmada without any mubalarah, we mentioned that it does not invalidate the fast. This way the author mentioned وبغير مبالغة من مضمضة لتبرد أو رابعة. If a person does it tabarrud meaning to make a person feels cold. If a person, for example, is suffering from there's a lot of heat, for example his body is too hot, so he takes the water not because of wudu, not because of madmada for wudu, but it is madmada to feel cold. Madmada to make a person feel cool. Now this can invalidate fasting if the water enters into the body's cavity, even though there is no mubalarah. Because why? Because there is no reason for a person to do it, unless if a person does the madmada for wudu. But if a person does madmada for something else, and even there is no mubalarah and the water enters into the body's cavity, the fasting becomes invalidated. Aw rabi'atin, the fasting also becomes invalidated if rabi'ah meaning he does it the fourth time. Now this is not a sunnah. Because sunnah only 3 times in wudu. So if he does the 4th time and the water enters into the body's cavity, the fasting becomes invalidated. This is not forgiven. Because why? Because this is not a sunnah. It does not have any relation with ibadah. Aw abathin, or he does it because of abath. Abath meaning without any reason. So the fasting becomes invalidated if water enters into the body's cavity, even though there is no mubalarah. So I hope it is clear, inshallah. These are some of the examples, and the author is saying that the fasting becomes invalidated. And then he mentioned وَبِتَبَيُّنِ الْأَكْلِ نَهَارًا لَا بِالْأَكْلِ مُكْرَهًا. Yani if a person, for example, is consuming food and then it becomes clear to him that dawn has come. Dawn has come. And a person eating sahur. A person is eating sahur, and then while eating, he found out that the time of Fajr has come 5 minutes ago. The time of Fajr has come. If this is based on yaqeen, the fasting becomes invalidated. But if he does not know, he is forgiven. If he does not know, he is forgiven. Or if he does any ijtihad and he feels that the time of Fajr has not come, then the fasting is not invalidated. Why? Because the origin is that the night is still present. But unless if a person comes into a conviction that the time of Fajr has come, and a woman must be pure from menstruation and postnatal bleeding, وَالْعَقْلُ فِي جَمِيعِ النَّهَارِ, and that a person must possess the intellectual, the intellect, al-aql, not a person who is insane. Fi jami' in-nahar, the whole day, from the time of Fajr until sunset. Wala yadurul irma was sukr. But when comes to fainting and intoxication, la yaduru, it does not give any effect to fasting, but there is a condition, in afaqa lahdatan fin nahar. If he is sober at any point of time in the day. What does it mean? Meaning, for example, a person make intention at night to fast the next day. And then what happens when the next day comes, he fainted. He fainted, and then before sunset, he became sober. Before sunset, he became sober. The fasting is valid, even though he fainted. The fasting is valid. Point number 1, he made the intention. Point number 2, he became sober at one point of time during the day. But if a person fainted, for example, before Fajr and all the way he fainted until after sunset, then the fasting is not considered to be valid. Fasting is not considered to be valid. Likewise, pertaining to as-sukr, intoxication. A person became intoxicated, for example, from the time of Fajr, for example, until Zuhur. Now the fasting is still valid, because why? He became sober and some parts of the day. But if a person became intoxicated before Fajr all the way until sunset, then the fasting is not valid. This is where the author mentioned the condition, in afaqa lahdatan fin nahar. The condition is that if he became sober in one part of the day. But it's different than a person who is insane. If it is opposite, if a person is insane at any point of the day, the fasting becomes invalidated, even though he insane for a moment. He became mad, he became insane, majnoon. The fasting became invalidated, even though it is a moment in the day. So this is where the author mentioned wala aqlu fi jami' in-nahar, that one of the conditions of the validity of fasting is that the person possesses al-aql fi jami' in-nahar, in the whole day. Wala yasihu sawmul idaini. It is not valid to fast in the 2 Eids, Eidul Fitri, Eidul Adha. There are hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that prohibit fasting in these days. Wala ayyamut tashriq, ayyamut tashriq, are the days in Hajj, 11, 12, and 13 of Dhul Hijjah. Wala nisful akhir min Sha'ban, and the second part of the month of Sha'ban, for people who are not used to fasting. A person who is not used to fasting, then it is not permissible and not valid for him to fast in the second part of the Sha'ban, illa li wirdin aw nadhrin, unless if a person has always been fasting. For example, there are people who fast Mondays and Thursdays always, every week, Mondays and Thursday. So there is no issue for him to continue all the way until Ramadan. And likewise, if a person fasts every Monday, or fasts every Wednesday, or fasts every Thursday, for example, every week he does it, then it is permissible for him to continue. This is the meaning of li illa li wirdin. Yani he has this wirid, meaning this continuation of the practice that he has before the coming of the second part of Sha'ban. Aw nadrin, and if a person made a vow to fast, it is permissible for him to fast. Aw qada, if a person has not made qada Ramadan last year, it is wajib upon him to make qada. Wajib upon him to make qada before the Ramadan comes, even if it is the second part of Sha'ban. Aw kafara to sawm, a person does jima in the past year of Ramadan, he has to pay the fasting. Now it is permissible for him to fast. Aw wasala ma ba'da nisfi bima qablahu, if a person fasts before nisfu Sha'ban, and he wants to fast it is permissible if he fasts in the month of Sha'ban. If a person fasts in the month of Sha'ban, in the beginning of Sha'ban, and he wants to continue, it is permissible. But it is not permissible for a person who did not fast in any days of Sha'ban, and do not practice any continuation of fasting weekly or monthly, then it is not permissible for him to fast in the second part of the month of Sha'ban. So now we continue with the next part, where the author speaks about what you call it, some conditions of fasting. He mentioned syartu man yajibu alayhi sawmu Ramadan, the condition that makes it obligatory for a person to fast in the month of Ramadan. Before this we spoke about the conditions of validity. Now we speak about the conditions of obligation. Number 1 is al-aqlu, number 2 al-bulugh, wal-islam, wal-itaqah. A person must have sound intellect, number 1. So fasting is not compulsory upon the mad person. Wal-bulugh, reaching puberty, fasting is not compulsory upon children who has not reached any puberty. Wal-islam, fasting is not compulsory upon non-Muslims. Wal-itaqa, fasting is not compulsory upon people who does not have the ability to fast. People who are sick, for example bedridden, the doctor says that cannot fast. It can pose danger to the health, it can cause death, it can cause the loss in your body parts. Now fasting is not compulsory for them. This is the meaning of itaqa, meaning has the ability to fast. وَيُؤْمَرُ بِهِ الصَّبِي لِسَبْعٍ وَيُضْرَبُ عَلَى تَرْكِهِ لِعَشْرٍ إِنْ أَطَاقَهُ. This is based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Muru awladakum bis salati li sab'in. Command your children to perform the prayers when they have reached 7 years old. Our scholars does qiyas, this analogy that since the Prophet mentioned that it is compulsory upon parents to command the children to fast when they have reached 7 years age, likewise pertaining to fasting. وَضْرِبُوا عَلَيْهَا بِعَشْرٍ, and beat them if they reach the 10 years of age. So this also pertaining to fasting. But the thing about fasting is that they must have the ability to fast. If a child is 7 years old and he does not have the ability to fast, then we cannot force them to fast. They must have the ability. They must have the ability to fast. This is different from prayers. So this is based on the hadith as what we mentioned. That is why the author mentioned in ataqahu. This is the condition. In ataqahu, if they have the ability to, they have the ability to fast. So I believe this is easy, straightforward. We go on to the next part. The author mentioned faslun wa yajuzul fitru bil marad alladhi yubihu tayammum. Now the author is going to speak about situations that can make a person break the fast. And we have this terminology where the author mentioned bil marad alladhi yubihu tayammum. Al marad mubih lit tayammum, sickness that makes tayammum permissible. The meaning is, number 1, sicknesses that can lead to death. If the doctor says that if you fast you will die, now this is the first example of marad yubihu tayammum. Number 2, one of the body parts will lose functionality. The doctor says to a person, and if you fast you become blind, if you fast your body will be paralyzed, then khalas, we say he cannot fast. He cannot fast. Number 3, if it changes the skin color, if the doctor says that if you fast your sickness will become in such that your color will change. Some parts of your body parts will change color. Now this is also permissible for a person not to fast. So this is the meaning of al-marad mubih lit tayammum. Yani sicknesses any that makes any tayammum any permissible. Because why tayammum? Because in the chapter of tayammum also we spoke about this. That using any water any is not compulsory, and if a person has any sicknesses any that can lead to death or losing any of the body parts or can change skin color and so on and so forth. So that is why it is known as al-marad yubih al-mubih lit tayammum. So the author and he mentioned that it is permissible for them to break their fast. Walil khaifi min al halak. Likewise, it is permissible for a person who fears for himself, that if he fasts he can lead to loss of life, he can lead to bodily damage. For example, wali ghalabatil ju' wal atash. Likewise, if a person is too hungry, too thirsty, that can lead to serious health problems, if he does not break he fast, if he fast and he can faint, for example, he can suffer from heat stroke and so on and so forth, then he can break his fast. Walil musafiri safaran tawilan mubahan. And for the traveler, for the musafir, it is permissible for him to break his fast. He is given the choice to fast or not to fast, but this is pertaining to musafir safaran tawilan. Safaran tawilan meaning if the destination is more than 86 kilometers. This we say masafatul qasr. That is permissible for him to do al-qasr. So it is permissible for him not to fast. Lil musafiri safaran tawilan mubahan. That the traveling is not based on ma'siyah. It is not based on sin. Not any person, for example, he wants to go overseas to gamble, or overseas na'udzubillah min zalik to commit zina. Now it is wajib for him to fast. Concessions is not given to a person who commits ma'siyah. So tawilan mubahan here meaning a traveling that does not consist of ma'siyah. It is a permissible kind of traveling. Illa in tara as-safaru ba'da al-fajri. Unless if a person travels and leave his country after Fajr. Now he is not given this concession to break the fast. So if he goes out before Fajr, then he can make the choice to fast or not to fast. But if he goes out of the country after Fajr, it is wajib for him to fast. وَالصَّوْمُ فِي السَّفَرِ أَفْضَلُ إِنْ لَمْ يَتَضَرَّرْ بِهِ. To fast while traveling is better if he does not have harm to fast. It is better, as what Allah mentioned, وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Fasting is better for you if you know the benefits of fasting, because Allah will give a lot of rewards. So nowadays traveling usually mashallah no problem. A person bought the plane, bought the car to fast while traveling. Nowadays is much easier than last time. Last time people cross deserts and jungle. Very difficult for them to continue fasting while traveling. So it is permissible for him to break their fast and to do qada after Ramadan to fast. This is the second situation that the author mentioned. Second example. The third example, shufi al-marid. Yani if a person is sick but he fasts. A person is sick but he fasts. And then in the day he becomes well. Meaning he becomes healthy again. Now it is compulsory for him to continue fasting. He cannot break his fast. So this is the situation of these three examples where they are immune. This is what the author is saying. Wahum immune. The situation is that they are fasting, and all these things comes in the middle of the day. Harum al-fitru. It is not permissible for them to break their fast. But if they began by not fasting, wa illa, yani this istisna. Wa illa meaning if they began by not fasting, and the child, for example, in the first example, he did not fast. And then in the middle of the day, he reached puberty. Now we say, what you call it? It is sunnah for him to do imsak. Sunnah for him to do imsak, not wajib. Not wajib for him to do imsak. Yani it is sunnah for him to do imsak. Why sunnah and not wajib imsak? Because at the point of obligation, at the point of fasting is not obligatory for them. The child, when the dawn comes and he has not reached puberty. So now when we ask the question, is fasting obligatory upon him or not? Fasting is not obligatory upon him. That is why to do imsak is sunnah for him. Because why? In the beginning, fasting is not obligatory upon him. he reached any puberty in the middle of the day. In the middle of the day. So we go back to the origin. The origin is that the fasting is not obligatory upon him in the beginning. Likewise, pertaining to the person who is sick, fasting is not compulsory upon him. But then he becomes healthy in the middle of the day. We say it is sunnah for you to do imsak. Because initially, fasting is not wajib for them. Likewise, the musafir. Yani if a musafir, for example, he break his fast. He break his fast and then he became mukim. He became mukim. Now it is, what you call it? It is sunnah for him to do imsak. Then the author mentioned وَكُلُّ مَنْ أَفْطَرَ لِعُذْرٍ أَوْ غَيْرِهِ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاء. Yani if a person break his fast because of udhr, a reason, a valid reason, or without a valid reason, وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاء. It is wajib for him to do qada. Yani whether we say, for example, a person is sick in Ramadan, he cannot fast, then it is wajib for him to do qada when he becomes healthy again after Ramadan. If a person, for example, breaks his fast without any reason, now he is sinful, and it is wajib for him to do qada. So this is what the author mentioned, ba'da tamakkuni, yani after he has the ability to perform the qada, yani this pertaining to the sick person. Illa sabi wal majnun wal kafir al asli. Except that he mentioned, qada is not compulsory upon as-sabi. As-sabi, why? Because fasting is not obligatory for sabi. He has not reached puberty. Likewise, al-majnun, fasting is not obligatory for majnun. Al-kafir al-asli, non-Muslim, fasting is not compulsory upon them. Wa yustahabbu muwalatul qada. So earlier we mentioned fasting is not compulsory. Qada is not compulsory upon them. Wa yustahabbu muwalatul qada. It is a sunnah to do muwala in qada. Muwala meaning to do it immediately. Yani for a person who has uzr. For example, a person is sick in Ramadan, he cannot fast. So just in case we forgot to make any intention, then we can still continue our fast. So this is important for us to take note. When it comes to fasting, or making intention in fasting. But if a person does not make any of those intention, then it is compulsory upon him to make qada, and imsak becomes wajib for him. Wal muta'addi bi fitrihi fi yawmi shak. If a person for example purposely break his fast fi yawmi shak in tabayyana kaunuhu min Ramadan, now he becomes clear that this day is from Ramadan, and he purposely break his fast. Now it is compulsory upon him to do imsak. It is compulsory upon him to do imsak, because now it turns out that this is the day of Ramadan. What is Yawm Shak? Yawm Shak, let me give you an example of Yawm Shak. So now imagine we are on the 29th of Sha'ban. Imagine we are on the 29th of Sha'ban. So we do not see the moon. We do not see the crescent tonight. So we thought that tomorrow is not Ramadan, but there is a possibility it's Ramadan. And then tomorrow, what happens? Somebody said that I saw the crescent last night. I saw the crescent. This person is adil, a person who can be trusted. So there are a few people, for example, who said that we witnessed that there is hilal last night. Then khalas, we say this is Ramadan. So what happens now for people who have done iftar or does not fast? They have to do the imsak. But now the problem is if a person for example he hear the news that this is from Ramadan and he purposely break consume something, now this imsak becomes compulsory upon imsak becomes compulsory upon him, because now we have the conviction that today is Ramadan. So a person has to do imsak. Wa yajibu qada'uhu 'ala al-fawr. Then it is compulsory upon him to make the qada, to make the qada. Because why? Because he purposely broke his fast, and if he is fasting for example. then he has to make up for the fast. Likewise, for those who do not know, it is compulsory for them to make up for the fasting. Because why? Now it turns out that day is considered to be from Ramadan. So now we have come to the part where the author will speak about the sunnahs in fasting. So he mentioned yustahabbu ta'jilul fitri inda tayaqqunil urub. It is a sunnah to break up any fast immediately after we are convinced that the sun has set. Wa an yakuna bi thalathi rutabat. Look at the tense. Wa ala rizqika aftartu fil madi. Yani by your sustenance I broke my fast. So meaning you break your fast first, then you get this dua, because otherwise there is a what you call it difference in the meaning here. Wa taftiru sa'imin. It is a sunnah to give people food for them to break their fast. And you have the famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the sawab, the rewards of their fasting will be given to you. Wa an ya'kula ma'ahum. It is a sunnah to eat in jama'ah when breaking any fast. Was suhur, to consume the sahur, the pre-dawn meal. It is a sunnah where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam what you call it encourage us to consume the pre-dawn meal. The Prophet mentioned wa fi sahuri barakah, in the pre-dawn meal there is barakah. Allah will give us strength to perform the fasting. Wa ta'khiruhu ma lam yaqa fi shak. And it is a sunnah to delay breaking any of the fast. Delay eating the pre-dawn meal as long as a person does not comes to a state of doubt. So usually what we do 10 minutes before Fajr, we stop 10 minutes before Fajr. So this is a sunnah for us to delay the pre-dawn meal. When it comes to the breaking of fast, it is a sunnah to do it immediately after sunset, and if you are convinced that the sun has already set. Wal irtisalu in kana alayhi ghusl qabla subhi. It is a sunnah to bathe the obligatory bath before Fajr. Because why? Because if you bathe the obligatory bath after Fajr, then it will be difficult for you to maintain water does not enter into your body's cavity. So that is why if a person in state of janaba, make sure that they bathe before Fajr. وَيَتَأَكَّدُ لَهُ تَرْكُ الْكَذِبِ وَالْغِيبَةِ وَيُسَنُّ لَهُ تَرْكُ الشَّهَوَاتِ الْمُبَاحَةِ. It is a sunnah while fasting to stop telling lies and backbite, because all these things will make rewards becoming less and less and less. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, "Kam min sa'imin." How many people who fast? "La yusalahu min siyamihi illa al-ju' wal atash." They do not get any benefit from their fasting except for hunger and thirst. Because why? Because they backbite, they lie, they do a lot of harm while fasting. So the rewards diminish. And then he mentioned wa yusannu tarku shahawat al-mubaha. It is a sunnah to leave everything that is appeal. Inshallah we will stop here because of time, and we will continue next week. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allah, next week next week we do not have class because next week is Nisfu Sha'ban. Inshallah. Next week we do not have any class. And then the next week also there will be no class until the month of Ramadan. Wallahu alam. I will see how in the month of Ramadan how I can finish this chapter of fasting. Inshallah ta'ala. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.